Don't invest your retirement funds like this guy. I'm not talking about this guy. I'm talking about a guy I'm going to share with you. So just earlier this morning, I did a video on test your knowledge on bonds, all right? And bond videos never get many views, so they just don't. But I still like doing bond videos because the people who like to watch like to be learned. I think they can get a lot when we talk about bonds because I think there's a lot of misconception on bonds. And unfortunately, people hear bonds and it's weird. It's almost like a news. It's like kryptonite, strange. Anyway, so here's a comment. So here's the video. It would never get many views. I mean, 189 views in an hour is not much. So let me get. The video is titled "Test Your Knowledge, Your Bond Knowledge with This Bond Quiz," and then we got my man Bill Carlson, Mr. Carlson, member from WKRP in Cincinnati. Give me a thumbs up if you remember Mr. Carlson. Bill says, "Here's a bond quiz answer. Don't buy them ever." I said, "Okay." I said, "Why?" So why? He goes, "Just look at the last 40 years of bonds. If this doesn't tell you why, you need to move on to another business." I was like, "What?" Because, I mean, I was like, that's a silly thing to say because if we remember what happened in 1982 to 2011, the bond market, so 1982 is basically 40 years ago, and the bond market it was on a trip to the moon. So it's a weird thing to say. I was like, what? And I'm going to show you why old Bill's wrong here. Anyway, so we're going to go back. We're going to look at this history of the 30-year bond right here. All right. And we're going to go back to 1982. This is when Volcker supposedly whipped inflation now. And we had right there, we could get right there. And we could get 30-year bonds at 14 and a quarter. 14 and a quarter at the end of 1981, so 1982. All right. That meant you're getting 14 and a quarter guaranteed with no risk at all and also state tax free. I mean, I don't know exactly what the rules were back then, but a lot of times they were. So either way, 14 and a quarter guaranteed with no risk at all. The irony of this right here, though, is look, we thought we whipped inflation now, but then in 1984, the rates went back up to almost 13%, which is weird because I thought 1982 is when we whipped inflation now. We won because Paul Volcker. Obviously, Volcker and the boys at the Fed, they don't control the long-term rates, but still, I mean, the long-term rates are indicative of future expectations for inflation. So that was kind of interesting. Be that as it may. So we'll see this long trajectory of market of the bond rates going down. So when that bond matured in 2011, you're getting the equivalent of 3 right there, basically 4% roughly. So watch this. This is interesting. See, look at this right here. See the green? This is annual change in the yield of the bond on the year close. Green's indicative of losses in bonds, all right? Because as the bonds, the yield goes up, the price of your current bond goes down. Look at that. The change in 2022, it was up 108%. The interest rate doubled from the previous year. The previous year closed as 1.90 in 2021. The close in 2022 was basically 4%. It had more than doubling, which meant your bond got killed. I was buying something. Look at that old Padres shirt. How cool is that? How cool are these old vintage shirts? I love them. Anyway, so right here, the green means the yields went up, which meant your bond price went down, the bond that you already owned. So you can see in 2024, the bonds are down a little bit. 2023, roughly even. 2022, we got smoked like no one's ever seen. In 2021, the bonds are down a little bit. However, watch this. So go back to 1982. Down, so that means the price is up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, down. You see what I'm saying? So we had, look at all this red. All that red is indicative of the prices appreciating because the bond rates are going down. Now, I talk about this in my course. What happens is the closer you get to maturity, the less appreciation is going to be because it becomes a short-term bond. But anyway, you see that. Look at that. I mean, look, you could have sold this bond right here. If you bought that in 1982, you could have sold that guy in 1991. It's still a 20-year bond, guaranteeing 14%. You would have made a freaking mint. Isn't that crazy? So the 30 years, other than the last 10, the bond market freaking crushed. And we'll just give an example here. So we're just going to look at bonds. So we're going to go back to 1985 as the earliest I can in Portfolio Visualizer. And we'll go to 2011. And I don't have a long-term government bond, so we're just going to use the Fidelity. This is the Fidelity investment grade bond. It's one of the oldest bond funds there is. and we'll just compare it to the S&P 500. Let's see. We're not going to do any withdrawals. So, and just let's see which, so this is going back 1985 to 2011. And we're going to see bonds held their own. I mean, S&P 500 right here, 10,000 invested is up to 137,000. 10,000 invested in Fidelity Investment Grade Bond Fund was up to $70,000 bucks. All right, so you'd expect the stocks would do more. But watch this. Let's go 1985 to 2024. All right, I want to show you something because this is what this guy's talking about, basically the 40 years. He's like, look at that, bonds got trounced. Bonds only gave you $10,000 in a Fidelity Investment Grade bond, only gave you $92,000, whereas $10,000 in the S&P 500 gave you $648,000 bucks. All right, that's true. That's true. I mean, look at that. A significant difference. Significant difference. What old Bill's missing out, though, is the difference between investing in accumulation mode and investing in decumulation mode. And let me show you what I'm talking about. See, this is what happens all the times. People forget to change their perspective. And this is, again, what I talk about in my course. I talk about this specifically. I have videos on this. Who you are as an investor, investing while working, investing while retired. There's a whole different mindset that comes. We cannot go for accumulation anymore because we're decumulating. I mean, this right here is just accumulating. But now we're going to say decumulating. I just want to show you something. We're going to go to 1985 to 2011. And we're going to take, we'll just take, let's see, cash flows. We're going to take withdrawal, fixed amount. We'll just take $400 a year for simplicity. And we'll adjust it for inflation. All right, so this is decumulation mode. All right, so where are we at now? Well, the S&P 500 still did quite well, but now look at the difference. It's only at $92,000, whereas the bonds at $32,000. All right, now that is still 2011. The worst drawdown was right here, 52% for the S&P 500 versus only 12.5% for the bonds. Compounded annual growth rate for the S&P 500 is only 8.5. Compounded annual growth rate for bonds is only 4.4. Pretty significant difference there, is it not? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So let's keep looking here. We're going to go down to 2000 to 2024. All right, because this is a retirement experience of a retiree taking 4% a year out. Oh, no. Oh, no. The S&P 500 is only at $3,100. This is 23 years of experience, man. If you're pulling money out, the S&P 500 is only worth $3,100. The bonds are still worth $8,400. Now, the bond's not going to last much longer either, I imagine, but the S&P, you're dead. You're dead to rights. So look at this. Compounded annual growth rate for the S&P 500, negative 4.72. Compounded annual growth rate for the bonds, negative 0.68. Quite a significant difference. Now, again, if we say we don't have any withdrawals, let's take a look over the last 23 years and see what we got from 2000 to 2023. Oh, the S&P 500 did better. 6.91 versus the bonds 4.13. The worst drawdown was 51% for the S&P 500, where bonds, the worst bond market in histoire, was down 16%. And even that, the bonds, even after the last 10 years, the bonds still, they did okay. It's better than a hole in the head. But watch this. We're going to go to 2000 to 2011. Watch what happened. We'll go to 2015. We'll say 15-year time frame. We're not taking any money out. Yeah, no, we're not taking any money out. Watch what happens. Bonds did better. Bonds did better. Why is that? Because of this right here, this chaos from 2000 to 2009. We've had a nice run here, but bonds did better. Now, let's go back to, I don't think I did, 1985 to 2011. Let's take 4% a year out, and we're going to do, that's 4% a year, adjusted with inflation. Let's see. So this would be the bull market for both bonds and stocks. All right, both had a bull market from 1982 to basically 2000, and from 1982 to 1999, both had a bull market. Bonds continue to have a bull market till 2011. That's just a fact. So let's see what happened here. Stocks did not have a bull market from 2000 to 2009. We went to 2011. Yep. And even here, the stocks they outperformed bonds. Look at that. Stocks are up to $92,000. This is going back to 1985. So even though we got trounced here, we still maintain ourselves because this incredible year that we had from 1985 to 1999, even though the next decade we did nothing. Bonds held their own though. Compounded annual growth rate 4.4. Compounded annual growth rate for stocks 8.57. The point being is, at the end of the day, you don't know what your retirement scenario is going to be. You don't know what it is. Are you going to be 2024 where you're pulling money out? Well, if you had all in stocks, you're doomed. That's all there's to it. Even though the last, going on 15 years now, stocks have freaking kicked butt and took names. But you don't know. And that's the question you got to figure out. It's like, well, if I'm decumulating and I'm decumulating in a down market, and we haven't talked about 1970s either. What happens there? Well, in stocks, you're done. You're done. I mean, that's just a sequence of return risk. Other than the last 2022, there wasn't anything like that for bonds. There just wasn't. Again, this is from a guy in my retirement planning course. I said, do not buy any bonds, essentially, because there were no risk. The downside risk is so much higher than any upside. Why? Because the yields were so low. I talked about it in my course, and I think I did that course in 2019 or 20. You can see that a mile away. Now it's different, though. Now you're getting 4% on a 10-year treasury, and I don't think they're going to cut like a lot of people think they are. I thought they would, and I'm not so sure. Anyway, and even if they do cut, still a boon for you bondholders. But I'm not so sure they're going to cut. But you just don't know. Are you retiring into a 2011 for stocks? Or are you retiring into a 2000? You don't know, man. Are you retiring into a 1982 for bonds and stocks? I don't think so. I think 1982 to 1999, I don't think we'll ever see that again. And the reason for bonds is because the interest rates were so high back then, they're just not. They'll never get up there again, most likely. And the reason for stocks is because that's the beginning of the globalization, essentially, when China came on the scene. I mean, don't forget, Nixon, when he went to China, what, 73, something like that? China, I mean, that it took 10 years for China to get developed enough in order to create our goods. You can't repeat that again. China is now basically a middle-class economy, not relative to the United States, but certainly relative to the rest of the world. You can't get that cheap labor like we could for China for the last 30 years. Those days are over. Now, what does that mean? I have no idea. Can you get cheap labor from robots? Sure. But I was just talking to a lady yesterday, her and her husband, down in Tejas, and she had to get on a conference call at work for, they got to make a robot. They had to make a robot work. So they're working on it. They can reduce labor with robots. I get it. So maybe that's coming. It's not here yet, that's for sure. So where's the cheap labor going to come? Where's globalization going to go? Globalization, I think, is seen as better days. So you can invest all stocks. I would just highly caution you, say, if we're looking back at the last 40 years, so yeah, bonds did okay. Bonds did okay. Just look again. For the last 40 years, what did bonds do? We go 1985 to 2024, which includes the worst market we've ever had. All right? And bonds did what? 5.87, man. That ain't bad. Even net of inflation. Oh, what about inflation, Josh? Even net inflation, bonds held their own. We invested $10,000. We got 30,000, 31,000 net of inflation. Anyway, Bill, you invest how you got to invest. I don't care. I'm just saying for the rest of you guys, accumulation is one thing, and decumulation is a whole different ballgame. All right, love your thoughts. We'll see you.